Aloha, my name is Hope Kalai. This talk is part of a workshop series on preserving public access on ancient Hawaiian trails that was shared in Kilauea, Kauai on August 16, 2014. We're going to take 3 quick journeys around the island of Kauai, first looking at traditional fishing and gathering methods. Second, we're going to look at more modern infrastructure and developments through the plantation era to modern times. And the last trip around Kauai, we're going to look at certain ahupua'a and the modern infrastructures and developments along the Alaloa Trail in those certain ahupua'a. This presentation features the coastal trail on Kauai known as the Alaloa. I will show that it encircles the whole island and it is a historic trail. First, I would like to address some semantics. The term Alaloa confuses many. There were over 30 kinds of ala, as considered in the Dictionary of Hawaiian Land Terms by Paul Nahoa Lucas. Some were redundant names, some were specific to Kauai, like the Alapi'i. A period, L period, A period has come to represent ancient lateral access, and new terms have come into use to cover crazy allegations like Alaloa. The first artifact made by people on Kauai was a footprint, the first step of people getting out of a boat. We will probably never know exactly where that was. It's probably eroded into the ocean hundreds of years ago. We do know that during certain times, social structure and the prosperity of the island flourished, especially during the reign of the ali'i Manokalanipo and for the next 400 years. This is known as the Golden Age of Kauai and is often referred to as Kauai o Manokalanipo. That's why I chose the name Alaloa o Manokalanipo. There were trails around the whole island, no matter how remote or seemingly unhospitable the landscape appears to foreigners now. Every watered valley was occupied. My favorite map maker made one of the earliest maps of Kauai that shows trails. Ursula Emerson was a mother, a school teacher, a nurse, everything that missionary wives had to be back then. She mapped Kauai and Ni'ihau after living in Hawaii for only 18 months. She never even stepped foot on Kauai or Ni'ihau, but she made some pretty good maps. Actually, she mapped the whole archipelago, and she eventually mapped the whole world in teaching her students where Bethlehem was. The first government survey of Kauai, made in 1878 by the USGS surveyors, shows trails around the whole island, even though it states that the Napali is unsurveyed. From the first act of the first king through the last act of the last queen, freedom of public access was a priority. Both on the Emerson map, State Registered Map 432, and the first government survey, Registered Map 1395, they both document historic trails. The settlement pattern on Kauai has changed over time. Native populations were radically diminished by diseases and social change, but communities remained dependent upon near-shore coastal resources. So we started working a couple decades ago with Mayor Baptiste, and his mana'o was that there was a lay of trail around the island of Kauai. And the reason there was a lay of trail is because it connected nearshore communities to their most important resources, which were limu, fish, and poi, all of which are coastal. Where does the Alaloa start? Where does it begin? Journey begins with the first step. Where was the first canoe landing? Many family genealogies have it at Nualolo. Nualolo Kai has an abundant reef system, and Nualolo has an incredible geologic feature. There's an X that's hundreds of feet tall, naturally in the rock wall face. This picture shows how tall the people are compared to the X. And Nualolo, where the Kala'au cross, is where the currents drop you off and where you jump on currents to go back to Hawaiki. Nualolo had coastal trails that were unique to Kauai, Alapi'i, and had horse trails coming in from above. The reason for going to Nualolo was nearshore marine resources that were abundant on the Nepali, and the currents there that would drop you off and hook you up to faster flowing currents going south. Alapi'i were unique resources to trails on Kauai. They were ladders that were affixed into the rock wall faces that got you up the cliffs. This area was extensively dug up in 1958, 1959, and radiocarbon dated. It's been deconstructed and reconstructed. The Napali Ohana is working to reconstruct the heiau at Nualolo, and from the cliffs above Nualolo you can see the reconstructed heiau down Makai. The Alapi'i o Mauna Kamaili was where the oahi, the firebrands, were thrown, and there were trails to the tops of these mountains that could be climbed in the dark. They're pretty steep. You can see the valley behind this rock wall here is Nualolo Aina. This is Nualolo Kai. Nualolo Aina in the background. And this picture is actually one of the last oahi displays on the Nepali coast. The Kalalau Trail, now managed by the State Department of Land and Natural Resources, is part of the Alaloa Trail around the coast of Kauai. The Kalalau Trail to Hanakapiai has over 500,000 visitors per year. Kalalau has 12,000 paid campers. So if 12,000 people are paying to camp, you know there's at least twice that many that are bootleg camping in Kalalau. So fishing was really important to the ancient Hawaiians, not fishing the way we think of it now. Fishing with spears, fishing with nets, fishing with throw nets, with dip nets. Fishing was a solitary practice as well as a community endeavor. There were hukilau in many sections of the island. These hukilau, this one here is Kalihivai, picture of Kalihivai, and one of the last hukilaus at Kalihivai. Fishing was a very important part of daily activity for a lot of people. Fishing methods have changed over the eons. It was common to use fish, we call them now fish poisons. They were really better called fish stupefacants, because they would make fish pass out, float to the surface, and they could just be scooped up with the net. These guys are picking ahuhu to pound up and throw in the water for fishing. Night fishing by Herb Kane. This is a picture of torch fishing on a reef. Modern fishing methods have changed a bit, but continuing to the present. Throw net is very important. Net materials have changed, the line sinkers have changed, but the basic mana'o is the same. And the deadliest catch would still be opihi, because where opihi live is a pretty treacherous area. Many famous limu picker were women. Women tended the marine gardens on the reefs and weeded out the junk limu, like this wahine is doing here, getting rid of the junk limu so the good limu could grow. Limu is now being mass marketed and turned into art and clothing. Another important part of the Hawaiian food triangle was kalo. And the kalo fields of Hanalei have been famous for eons. Most people did not live in their lo'i. Most people had 2 or 3 apana. Their first apana was usually filed for their lo'i. Their lo'i was the most important thing. Where you grew kalo was one of the most important things. You could live anywhere, but you could only grow taro in certain places. So the lo'i for the apana for lo'i was usually filed first. The pahale were the second apana, and they sometimes were not anywhere near the lo'i. This house here could be tied to this lo'i here with all these different lo'i belonging to other people in the middle. So the ali'i realized that there were no guarantees of access early on, and that's why they started writing laws to provide for that, provide for access to the people, from their houses to their lo'i. Most kuleana filings did not even mention trails or roads. They might talk about orange trees, coconuts, maybe this special kind of ko that's growing here, sugarcane, but they did not talk about trails. They were silent as to trails. Didn't mean they didn't exist. This guy had an obvious trail right to his hale, but his kuleana filing might not reflect that. So in traveling around the island from Nualolo through the Nepali district to Halelea, we would come to the caves in Ha'ena. This is an old picture of Ha'ena before the invasives moved in. And the hala of Naue. Nani vali na hala o Naue. And Wainiha was very different. Had landings, had railroad tracks. Had a bridge here with a horse on it. So you can see the landing in Wainiha here, in Wainiha Valley. And here's the bridge in Wainiha again a little bit later. And here it is again in 1946 after it got bust up from the tsunami. This is Lumahai before all the trees grew in. And Lumahai Landing showing commercial use now where there is none. These are photographs of Hanalei taken in 1897. This is an 1897 photograph from Brother Bertram of St. Maxime's Mission, which is now at what we call Black Pot in Hanalei. It was the Catholic mission on Hanalei River, and it was built in I think the 1860s. 1864 it was dedicated, and this is from 1897. Another picture of St. Maxime's Mission in Hanalei, the Catholic mission in Hanalei, right at the mouth of the river. And here it is, no more. This is 1924, no more Catholic mission. It had moved to the main road by then. So a lot of the stories about the Alaloa around Kauai were about river crossings, stream crossings, because there weren't any bridges. So it was about streams and stream crossings, ferries and scows. How are you going to get across the river? How are you going to get your horse across the river? And all your stuff. So this is actually a postcard of the Kalihivai ferry crossing. This map shows the Catholic missions on the coast from Hanalei to Moloa'a, and the blue crosses are the Calvinist outstation meeting houses. So the Catholics had the coast, the Calvinists had the Alanui Aupuni, the inland public road, is where they located their churches. This picture shows Halelea District, Hanalei Bay right here, and the Alaloa comes around the coast right here. You can see where it would be right along the coastline here. And this picture shows the Hanalei Pier in the late 1800s. Times were different, travel was different, and in 1924 there was a railroad track on the pier to get sugar cane and products down. So in 1924, the Royal Order of Kamehameha had their first statewide convention on Kauai, and they went from Hanalei all the way to Kekaha, and this is a picture of a few of the Royal Order walking the road into Hanalei, 1924. In the late 1860s, the post office in Hanalei would take the mail to Kealia on Tuesday on the Alaloa. On Thursday, they would come back more Mauka on the public road, going to the steamer landing in Kealia. 1890, the Alaloa at Kahili Landing, Kilauea, shows commercial use. You can see the bags probably of sugar being loaded or stuff being offloaded, brought into Kilauea. This is 1924 4th of July outing on Kahili Quarry Road, which is the Alaloa going to Kahili Landing. And the Alanui Aupuni over what is now Kolo Road in Kilauea, and the bridge that has just been rebuilt in the late 1800s was multiple use management. You could run a railroad car on it, or these steam plows that are waiting to cross. Here you have to put the planks down over the railroad tracks for the steam plows to go. This map from 1892, registered map 1971 by Montserrat, shows commercial roads but no trails. And it shows that the ferry crossing Kalihiwai, the road, the Alaloa crossing Kalihiwai, just has a break in it, and you have to cross with a ferry. So here's the map turned upside down. These ladies are standing right here on this point. The Alaloa comes in right here, and then the ferry takes them across, and the the Alaloa continues on the other side. So the little village of Kalihiwai, before the 1946 tsunami, and all the houses down there, and 1946 took that bridge out too. This picture of Kihili Landing, Kilauea rock quarries, there's 100-year difference between this picture and this picture. Not much has changed except for the absence of the landing and the derrick that's not up here. No more boats. In Kilauea, the Alaloa is Kahili Quarry Road, and it had a commercial use for the landing at Kahili Quarry until, I believe, 1973. These are pictures of the Kilauea Hotel and the Kong Lung store. Kilauea Sugar Plantation had what's called a donkey engine that they would use to load bags of sugarcane onto boats down at Kahili Landing. And this landing was in commercial use for about 100 years. 1973 was the last time I think the federal government put money into the rock revetments of this landing. So 100 years of commercial use of the Alaloa at Kahili Landing. Now there's a bit of quandary about the Alaloa. You can barely walk it now, even though those Model Ts could all drive it in 1924. Now it's hard to walk. Four-wheel drive only beyond this point, and access is a bit of a mystery because it appears to be owned by the county and a private entity, and now Fish and Wildlife Service. So why does anybody want to go down to Kahili Landing? Well, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and it is a traditional, customary, historic trail. So continuing along the Ko'olau district on the Alaloa, there are absurd allegations that the coastal trail takes an inland jut for about a mile or two in the ahupua'a of Waipake and Lepeuli. The reason for this trail, the lateral coastal trail and the near shore marine resources of Limu right here, you could not pick from this inland Mauka location. So this really needs traditional cultural users to comment on the allegation that this Alaloa Trail is really a mile and a half inland, right Mauka of the best limu on the whole coast. So in 2014, Na'alahele produced a map that has the Alaloa Mauka and the Alanui Aupuni Makai. This map makes no sense to traditional cultural users and local people, and Na'alahele really needs to be held accountable for this map and explain how it can be so differently interpreted. The Ka'aka'aniu Reef System is among the most documented managed marine resources in Hawaii. On Pakala Point between Waipake and Lepeuli, there's the remains of a fish pond named Ka'umi Ka'iva Fish Pond, and you can still see the outer shape of it after many 30 feet tsunami. This fish pond probably hasn't had any work done on it for over 150 years, but you can still see the shape of it. The Ko'olau Elementary School was excluded in a grant to Abner Wilcox in 1851. So the school was in existence in 1851 all the way through till the 1970s on Ko'olau Road. The building to the left is the Japanese school. The nun and the flags are from a movie, Donovan's Reef. The 1946 tsunami wiped out a lot of coastal houses, and traces of trails still remain. This picture shows the Alaloa in Molowa'a headed up towards Ka'aka'aniu. It's just an ancient footpath made by Tutu's feet. The Alaloa on Molowa'a Bay Ranch comes in on the bottom left side here. It's been designated by Na'alahele, adopted into the state system of trails. Part B over here was when Falco Properties moved Kuleanas, a trail segment was retained on the coast. So we have Alaloa over here where A is, Alaloa over here where B is. And the reason for this trail is this reef. The limu resources, the nearshore resources, the fish on this reef. So you have the Alaloa coming in, the red line here, the Alaloa being reserved in 2008 when Falco moved the Kuleanas. It was located in reserve right there. So the two red lines are state located Alaloa fragments. And then you have this allegation that the Alaloa is really on Ko'olau Road, or it's really 1,000 feet inland. None of it makes traditional gathering sense. You cannot access the resources that this trail is meant to access by using these crazy trails that are 1.5 miles inland. The Alaloa continued coastal, accessing coastal resources. The state segment of the Na'alahele Trail, the Alaloa at Molowa'a Bay Ranch, goes up the hill at Pukanahia, around towards Ka'aka'aniu, and then you come to this sign that says the Alaloa Trail ends. But it doesn't end, it continues to the limu resources. But there is a sign and barbed wire preventing you from continuing on this cultural trail. There is an albatross sanctuary that has been erected in the middle of the trail, and there are barbed wire fences now prohibiting lateral coastal transit. This may be a safer place for the albatross, but it definitely is not a safe place for people to be forced down to the splash zone of the surf to try and continue on their lateral coastal transit. It says that there is a bird sanctuary and you have to keep out, and where the only way to get down to the surf is very dangerous, and there is a large boulder field that is not suitable for lateral coastal transit with 100-pound bags of wet limu. So the Alaloa continues around Molowa'a Bay Ranch, continued around the coast, and was in evidence in this 1916 plat map, 3027 of Molowa'a, continuing across the stream, across Molowa'a Stream. So it continues southward towards the Hui lands, and the state reserved 85 acres of coastal land so you don't have to go down on the boulders. The Alaloa continues towards Papa'a. Papa'a Bay Ranch is that rather large hotel-looking structure right on the beach, and this is the remains of what used to be a fish pond in Papa'a Bay. Papa'a has had a lot of access issues over the eons, resulting in arrests, and the Alaloa continues at Aliomanu, and it's falling in the ocean. So it's down to one lane, and this is pretty precarious to the folks that live behind it. Anahola during Plantation Era had a landing and a pier for loading ships. But now all that remains are the pilings of the pier at a surf break now called Pillars. This is Anahola when the lo'i were all planted to rice after the Japanese displaced the Hawaiians. And there now is a base jump from Kalalea Mountain. This is a 1924 picture of the Kealia Plantation and Kealia River and the bridge. This picture of the sugar plantation in Kealia shows the mill, a ship off the landing, and the remains of the plantation village. This is an excerpt of the plantation picture showing the railroad and a steamer in the background offshore at Kealia Landing. And this is all that remains of the railroad tracks now at Kealia. Just a short segment of tracks is all that remains. This is a 1924 picture of Kapa'a. This picture shows the Kapa'a racetrack and polo fields and trails leading to and from the shoreline. And there's layers of trails and roads around the Wailua River and the bridge. This is the area of Lidgate Park now, and the newly completed bridge in 1919. Wailua River, and Wailua River where Kua Mo'o Road is now, and you can actually see the kua of the mo'o going Mauka. Trails over the dunes in Kapa'a, around Marine Camp, and Kawailoa Stream, which is past KCCC. Ahukini Landing was a very important commercial port until the harbor was built in Lihue. Ahukini. And the Hanamalu Bridge, railroad trestle, and mill. Now Wili Wili Harbor being built. And there was a railroad car to carry rocks on the outer breakwater on the southern side of the harbor. Lihue in older times, Plantation Mill Pond, downtown Lihue, and the Huli'ia. This is Alikoko Fish Pond. Lo'i in Niumalu, Kalapaki. Alikoko. Old fish pond wall at Alikoko, taken in the 1900s, before the mangrove moved in. Alikoko now. And Alikoko at night. This is a tunnel that was built through Haupu Mountain to Koloa and to the Maha'ulevu area. It was built in the late 1940s for the plantation. And these are pictures of Koloa and Koloa Landing. Koloa Landing was an important steamer port. This picture of Lawai shows Lawai Valley and the stream before the Allertons moved in, and the cane fields. Hanapepe. And the salt ponds in Hanapepe. An early picture of the Makaweli Mill and a postmark from 1892, Makaweli. And Waimea during different times. You can see railroad tracks, an old Model T, a hale, and this one is from the 1860s. Here's Waimea in 1860 with wagon tracks in the sand. Waimea Village. And the river. Not much has changed now except a lot less water in it now. So it's all about how you're going to get across the river. How are you going to get your stuff across? How are you going to get your stuff loaded on the boats? How are you going to get your stuff ashore from the boats? See the horses swimming ashore from the steamer? Waimea bridges. And the Waimea Bridge was built where the scow crossing was. Before the first Waimea Bridge was built, people crossed the river at a ford. And then after the ford, there was a scow, and then there was a wooden bridge put up where the scow crossing was, to be later replaced by this concrete and later the iron bridge. This is the Royal Order of Kamehameha in 1924 on Waimea Pier. And marching through the town of Waimea. The pier during earlier times, and the town of Waimea showing the courthouse and churches and schools. The pier, Waimea Pier, and the mill. These are Korean brides, picture brides, and the Kekaha mill. An aerial of Mana, and the shrimp farm at Mana. This is a 1931 picture of Mana, Barking Sands, and Nohili Dunes. More of Nohili. This is the Royal Order at Nohili, 1924. In the late 1870s, there was a school teacher who lived in Mana who hiked every day into Miloli'i to teach the kids school. There were about 30 kids there. This picture of Miloli'i shows the hale on the right. That's the one that's been taken down and reconstructed at the Bishop. You can see the trail that the teacher hiked daily from Mana. And coming down from the top was rather precarious. There was a horse trail, but now the only way to get there is by boat. Now we're going to take another trip around the island and look at some of the more modern infrastructure and developments. We're going to look at the roads and the trails, the cultural byways, and the infrastructure, the social constructs that have been built that are determined by the geology of the island, the topography and the hydrology. Agriculture around the island has changed, the irrigation patterns have changed, but the ocean landings have remained pretty much constant. Piers were built where the traditional canoe landings were, and railroads connected commerce to trails, and the trails connected churches, schools, and post offices to commercial districts and towns. I will show that the Alaloa is ancient. It's an ancient trail, and the use of it has continued throughout the pre-contact era, the mission era, plantation times, all the way through to the modern era. and that the Alaloa connects ancient coastal communities. The Alaloa encircled the entire island of Kauai. Um, in certain places, there were different applications. There were different kinds of ala to get around the island. In places of precipitous pali, there were ladder structures, ala pi'i, but the Alaloa went around the entire island. It was essential for traditional lifestyles and accessing coastal resources. There were no bridges until the late 1880s or 90s. The Belt Road was not completed around Kauai until 1927. So every stream crossing presented challenges. How are you going to get across the river? How are you going to get your stuff across the river? Your horses, your belongings, your kids. How are you going to get across without getting wet, without getting washed down? These pictures show the roads in Mana under construction, early roads with mules, then the Macadam Road, and later in the, I believe in the 40s, roads were still being worked on to Mana, to Palahale. Pre-contact era agriculture centered around watered stream valleys. Plantation era agriculture was on the kula lands, the tabletop flatlands, but the landings remained the same. Where you could load your boats and ship stuff out remained about the same. Pre-contact era, there were about 39,000 acres of land on Kauai under production. Plantation era, there were 243,000 acres under production. Kauai was 100% sustainable in past times. Now it's less than 10% or less than 5% sustainable. Kauai plantations around the island were centered around the coast, the Alaloa. So the big change from 100% sustainable to plantation era of less than 10% sustainable, and the land ownership pattern changing from everything being held for the public to now there were crown and government and privatized lands. So all of these were of great importance to the change in agriculture. But the canoe landings remained about the same through all these changes. This map shows where all the landings, wharfs, and harbors were in 1903. This map, the 1903 maps, are shown in the pink stars. The modern launch ramps and Department of Ocean and Boating, Ocean Recreation launch ramps are shown in the blue and yellow and red dots. So the locations of the harbors and landings has not changed that much over time. Wharfs, landings, and harbors continued to change as commerce developed and needs for shipping changed and boats improved. Almost every landing had some sort of railroad track. How are you going to load your cattle? This is a picture of loading cattle in Kalapaki. They were dragged out to the smaller boats and then rowed out to the steamer and lifted up to the inter-island steamer. You can see loading cattle was quite a challenge before the piers were built. And before Nawiliwili Harbor was constructed, um, the landings around the island were of greater importance. There were landings and railroad tracks where we don't expect them now, like Lumahai. Hawaii had the earliest railroad in Hawaii, Kilauea Railroad. The last spike was pounded by uh, Princess Lydia Kamakaeha, later Queen Liliuokalani. The railroad tracks around Kauai were not contiguous. They didn't connect with each other. They serviced the landings. So the Makaweli Railroad track went to the Port Allen landing and Kaloa Mill. Ahukini landing was connected by rail to Kealia, but the Kilauea plantation only connected to the Kahili Quarry landing. So the railroad tracks were not contiguous around the island of Kauai. But there were trails to the rails for loading sugarcane and other agricultural products. In the 1870s, the postal routes were mapped. And you can see the Nepali was still getting, it wasn't daily mail, but it was probably twice a week mail. In the Ko'olau district, the mail went on Tuesday on the Alaloa and came back from Kealia on Thursday on the Alanui. That's why there's two trails up in that area of Kauai. Churches and missions were located around the island in close proximity to the Alaloa to facilitate people getting there. This map shows the UCC churches. They're UCC now. They were Calvinist mission churches around the island of Kauai. Schools were all located around the Alaloa in plantation camps and areas of high concentration of population. And there were quite a few shipwrecks around the island of Kauai that made a lot of coastal traffic. The Ha'aheo o Hawaii that went down in 1824, there were things floating ashore, I've read, for 2 or 3 years afterwards. People were still going down and picking up stuff from the shipwreck. So every time there was a tsunami, every time there was a big shipwreck, just like the Fukushima disaster, people have to get out to the coast and pick up stuff. So the Alaloa is very important during times of shipwreck and tsunami. You need a lateral coastal trail for transit. There have been several instances of martial law declared on Kauai. The first couple were because of epidemics and quarantines in the 1800s. The leper war in Kalalau, they brought a cannon and a howitzer. And during World War II, there were over 10,000 rolls of barbed wire strung around the island on our reefs and beaches within 6 months. And over 100 bunkers. There was a lot of nighttime patrol. This is a picture of the Japanese Zero that went down on Niihau. So, different times have necessitated different security needs around the island, but there will always be a need for lateral coastal transit. And these are early bridges that were built around the island at the turn of the century. This is Hanalei Bridge, Waimea. Uh, this one is Lumahai, Wainiha, Kilauea, Wailua. Kauai also had swinging bridges, footbridges, and a unique kind of rock stone bridge, columnar basalt. There are places on the island where there are basalt columns, and they were stacked up over the Huli'ia River, and an early bridge was made at the turn of the 1900s. Agriculture on Kauai in the 1800s included many crops um, like coffee, oranges, tobacco, um, cattle for sure, and sheep and wood. Some of the wood was exported to Honolulu for firewood use, but a lot of it was sandalwood. And the sandalwood trade lasted for about 30 or 40 years, from the late 1819, 1820 to about 1840. And sandalwood was carried down the mountains to holes dug in the ground that were the shape of a ship's hull, the exact size and length of a ship's hull. And sandalwood was loaded into there until a full shipload was stacked up, and then it was carried down to the harbor and loaded onto the ships. So these sandalwood measuring pits, one of them on Molokai is part of the Na'alahele Trail system, and they weren't on any historic maps. It was a point in time that was used. The historic use of these pits was only about 30 or 40 years. So the sandalwood trade had huge impacts on the people and the forests of Hawaii, and generated many new trails. We're going to go around the island and look at certain ahupua'a, not all of them, but the ones that have the most documentation. And then there will be a little paper like this that's like a sticky paper that has the social constructs that are built on or near the Alaloa in that particular ahupua'a. So beginning on the Nepali, uh, first, Nualolo, Kalalau, Hanakoa, Hanakapiai, Wainiha, Hanalei, and the social constructs had just about everything. Kilauea, the constructs. Lepe'uli, and the checklist. Moloa'a, the checklist. Anahola, Kalia, checklist. Kapa'a. Checklist. Ahukini. And the checklist. Hanama'ulu. And just about all the constructs. Lihu'e. Na wili wili. Hule'ia. Kipu. Koloa. Mahaulepu. Makawena and Vele Vele. Lawai. Kalaheo. Ele Ele. Kaumakani. Hanapepe. Waimea. Keikaha. Mana. Miloli'i. This is a map of the historic sites on Kauai put out by the Historical Society. You can see they are all around the island, most of them coastal except for number 11 in Kokee. This map shows the wind names around the island of Kauai, the most predominant winds of the area, from the wind gourd of La'ama'ama'o. And this map shows where the dated ancient sites around the island are in regards to the streams, and the Alaloa in red. In summary, it's obvious that the Alaloa o Manokalanipo is ancient. It connects ancient coastal habitation sites that have been dated to 1,000 years ago. It's also obvious that the Alaloa went around the entire coastline of Kauai. The coastal location of the Alaloa was determined and proved by Lo'ikalo locations and later Plantation Era landings and piers. Again, the wharfs and harbors were around the island on top of the canoe landing sites. And post offices around Kauai were all around the island, including Kalalau. Churches all around the whole island. And bridges really changed travel on Kauai once they were built, starting in about the 1900s. Schools were located all around the island in close proximity to plantation camps, and before that in proximity to missions and churches. So what is the future of hiking on Kauai? Is it paved bike paths? Is it pay trails? What is the future of fishing on Kauai? What is the future of inter-island travel to Kauai? And how will that change foot transit around the coast? In 2014, the state legislature budgeted $170,000 to identify, restore, and manage the lateral coastal trail, the Alaloa on Kauai, but the money seems to have not been spent for that purpose. So Kauai really needs the Ko'olau district, Alaloa, to complete the lay of trail around the island of Kauai. The state trailheads on Kauai, there's nothing in the Ko'olau district at all. These maps show a tourist blog from 2013 where they traveled. It's not much different than the Alaloa in 1878. These two maps are showing the south shore of Kauai and the lateral coastal trail, documented in 1833 by Ursula Emerson. Some of it appears to have been forgotten on the 1878 map. So if you only look at one map, you might miss the Alaloa location. It's time to step up for the trails of Kauai now before it's too late. And we have a vision for a 10-foot wide, 10-mile long, through 10 Ahupua cultural greenway from Aleomanu to Anini to preserve the ancient foot trail. It would connect 12 county beach parks with a lateral coastal trail. I want to thank all the historic photographers who have preserved these vignettes of our history in pictures. Most of these were from the late 1800s. I want to also thank those who keep the photos. Kauai Museum, Kauai Historical Society, the Hawaii State Archives, and my favorite websites for Hawaiian history information, ulukau.org, huapala.net, and avakonohiki.org, treasure troves of information about kuleanas and land grants. I also want to thank all those who have helped contribute to this effort, the community groups who have financially sponsored it, Surfrider, the Kauai group of the Hawaii Sierra Club, Malama Moloa'a, and the off-island speakers, and the 2014 Hawaii State Legislature for considering the Alaloa. I hope they continue through with their goal to manage the Alaloa on Kauai.